Good afternoon, everyone. It is yours truly here at an unusual hour and day. I know you are accustomed to us doing our Drop the Mic 2020 Facebook Lives on Thursday evening, but we just had such a special person today that we just had to do it on a Tuesday afternoon, and that is Mr. David Swanson. David is an author, an activist, a journalist, and a radio host. He is the executive director of World Beyond War. Hello, somebody on that. Worldbeyondwar.org is where you can click and join and find all kinds of information about the type of world that we can live in. Notice David said world without, not just the United States. We can't have just the United States without war. We need a world without war. Now, as you all know, I'm going to give you these stats here. We've been doing this for almost 2 months, David. Well, I just lay it out. 61% of the discretionary budget goes to the Pentagon, not to enlisted men and women, and not to veterans who need help, not for homelessness, none of that, to the military industrial complex at our expense. We are talking about a discretionary budget that is about $1.19 trillion with a T. Yes, $1 trillion with a T. Portions of that go to education, I think about 5%. Not nearly enough. Healthcare, not nearly enough. Infrastructure, not nearly enough. But yet we are edifying other folks, the military industrial complex, contractors, with our tax dollars, not to keep us safe, not to help our veterans, but to enrich people who are greedy as hell. There's no other way to describe it. So I'm gonna bring on in David because he's the expert on this issue. David, so glad to have you here. I got to shout out Ben Cohen. As you know, he has been on this journey to get people to really tune into where our money goes and to be actively engaged in demanding more and better, not just from the Congress, but from the President of the United States of America, no matter who they are, whether they are Democrat or Republican. David, why should these things matter to us? Because it is really hard for people to wrap their minds around caring about the military industrial complex.
Well, I don't think it's that hard. I think people just don't hear about it on their televisions. They don't see it in the New York Times. But once you sit down and talk with them about it for a few minutes, it's not over their heads. It's not too difficult. If you're going to get upset that the police and the prisons are getting 10% or so of the local and state money, which is outrageous and beyond what any other country on the earth is doing, and that money needs to be moved out of those disastrous programs. Yeah. You got to get upset about the fact that the much, much larger budget of the federal government, as you say, has got over 60% of the discretionary budget going into militarism. And it's not just the $750 billion or so in the Pentagon, in the Department of so-called Defense that used to be called the Department of War. It's also the Energy Department, which is mostly nuclear weapons. It's also the State Department, which hires mercenaries. It's also the so-called Homeland Security Department. It's across all the secret agencies that won't even tell you their budgets, and the extra slush fund for wars. It's across all those agencies and departments. It's well over half of what you pay in your income taxes goes to wars and preparing for more wars, which makes the United States radically different from other countries in the world. If you compare the United States in life expectancy and health and education and quality of life across numerous measures, and I know we're number one, there isn't a single thing in which we're number one. It's a lie. The United States is just awful compared to every other wealthy country on earth, and is behind a great many poor countries in many of these measures, in part because so much money is going to the billionaires and staying with the billionaires, but in large part because so much money is going into militarism, and it doesn't have to be that way, and there isn't any upside to it. It is, people start talking about, let's take a little bit out and we'll still be safe. No, it doesn't make you safe. It makes you less safe. It's counterproductive. It enrages enemies. It generates hostility. It fuels war. It creates momentum towards war. Take some of it out, put it to good uses, and we'll be more safe.
That's right, David. And you really hit the nail on the head. I know that you have a book you have several books, but War is a Lie, which I want us to talk about a little more. You also have warisacrime.org. You host Talk Nation Radio. You are a Nobel Peace Prize nominee. Oh my God, how often in life do you get to talk to a Nobel Peace Prize, underline, underscore, exclamation point, Peace Prize nominee? Can you share with us, tell us a little bit about your book, War is a Lie, and why you care so deeply about these issues? You could be doing so many other things with your time, but you have laser focused on this as a vocation. Why is that?
Well, I have a lot of books at davidswanson.org/books, and World Beyond War has a number of books you can find at World Beyond War, and worldbeyondwar.org makes the case for why I'm doing this. I mean, when Andrew Carnegie set up, with his ill-gotten gains, set up the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, which has long since abandoned its mission, the mission was abolish war, have a board meeting, find the second worst thing in the world and start abolishing that. Yeah. To me, that's basic ethics. There's no question. That's what you do morally. And you don't just pick a war that's particularly awful and oppose that war. You get rid of the institution of war, which does far more damage, more death, more injury, more destruction than all the wars put together, because of the money, because you could take 3% of just US military spending and end starvation on Earth. You could take a little over 1% of just US military spending and end the lack of clean drinking water on Earth. You could take 10% of the Pentagon budget, just the Pentagon budget, just 10%, which is what there's going to be a vote on in both houses of Congress this month. And you could lift every family in the United States with children living in poverty up to the poverty line. You could take fractions of this money and put up an effort to protect the natural environment from climate destruction that the best climate salvation organizations don't even dare dream of. That's the kind of money we're talking about. So it's an institution where all the money is that's needed for good things, that is itself one of the top destroyers of our natural environment, the leading consumer of petroleum in the world, the US military, that generates and fuels racism and xenophobia, that arms and trains local police forces to be militaries, that has this corrosive impact on our culture and on our government, destroys accountability and transparency, creates every excuse for secrecy in the name of enemies. So it's the whole institution of war that we have to dismantle.
So we have a question, and I'm going to ask you a question because I am just overwhelmed with all of this. This has been an excellent, fantastic journey of enlightenment for me. And all of us have issues that are near and dear to our heart. I like to call them the top 3 or the top 10. And because there's intersectionality between all of these things, it is so good when we kind of venture out from our top 3 things. And this has been that for me. So we have Aaron who asks, as you say, people will not hear about this in the New York Times. Why does the mainstream American press largely ignore the realities of the military-industrial complex, given that it is an issue that impacts our daily lives more than any other? Thank you for that, Aaron. David, take it away. That's beautiful.
No, I can't go for hours on any of these questions, so I'll just give a start and you can cut me off. But okay. The corporate media is a corrupt institution with ownership that is corrupt, that interlocks with the boards of military profiteers, weapons dealing ownership. We have think tanks and universities in this country that are funded by foreign dictatorships that are major purchasers of US weaponry. When we talk about the military-industrial complex, it's not just the US military, it's all the world's militaries. We've got a quarter of the world's prisons, right? But we've got half the world's militarism, and the other half is largely buying US weapons, which is overwhelmingly the top supplier. And when you have countries like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates as major purchasers of US weapons, and in the case of the war on Yemen, partners in a war with the US military, funding think tanks like the Center for American Progress that we think of as our good liberal Democratic Party think tanks, we've got a problem. And the universities and major institutes at the universities funded by these dictatorships that are armed by US weapons, their militaries are trained by the US military, and their militaries are actually funded with US tax dollars. We're paying for the militaries of brutal dictatorships around the world. You've got all these sources of corruption. And then when you don't have one of the major two political parties protesting something, well, then it's not an issue for the corporate media. There's bipartisan harmony. There's no debate. There's nothing to report on. So to the extent that you get, now you've got a couple dozen Congress members in the Democratic Party saying, move $350 billion out, not just 10%. If you get that to the point where it's a major part of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, then there would be a debate. Then the corporate media would say, oh, this is something we have to cover as a debate. Otherwise, it doesn't fit their whole story of gridlock and bipartisan acrimony, because these funding bills usually just sail through with great bipartisan harmony, and that doesn't really fit the narrative.
So this is why we the people, to understand this issue. And as you said, that once people are educated, once their eyes are opened, you cannot unknow what you now know. And that is a beautiful thing that you are doing, and organizations that you are affiliated with, and other organizations like Common Defense, Cold Pink, About Face, Peace Action. Our Revolution is engaged in this. The Poor People's Movement, as we know, that is being led in partnership with the Bishop, Dr. William Barber. Public Citizens, Veterans for Peace. I mean, we can go on and on and on. And so I shout out these organizations, David, and I want you to shout out some too that I may have missed, because we need our fellow Americans to actually, and I am going to say the technical term, give a shit about this, because it impacts every other thing that we care about. If it's the environment, racial justice, social justice, political justice, just everything. It's, to me, that this reminds me of really the Green New Deal, or caring about Mother Earth. Mother Earth intersects with every other thing that we think we can do as human beings to make the world a better place. Without Mother Earth, we cannot function here and make the world a better place. So I want people to think about caring about, first understanding, seek first to understand and then to be understood. That's a quote from Stephen Covey. To understand this issue and embrace it as one of their top 3 or one of their top 5, because it intersects every other thing that they care about. That I had Congressman Ro Khanna, he joined me about 3 weeks ago now, and he gave this incredible stat, these numbers that still I can't shake. And I want you to comment on this. He said under Bush, it was about $400 billion. We're just talking about, there are other monies as you laid out, but I'm just talking about in terms of the discretionary budget. Under President Bush, we were at about $400 billion for one pot. Under President Obama, it increased to about $600 billion, the same one pot. There are other pots you just named this afternoon. And now, Jesus Christ, we're at $720 billion. David, why is it that this pot continues to grow, but yet when we advocate for Medicare for all, they say we don't have the money? Or we advocate for more money in education, they say we don't have the money? Or my God, Flint, Michigan is the canary in the coal mine to bring our attention to all of the places in this country where people in America have dirty water, and they say we don't have money for infrastructure. David, please help me to understand this. Help us to understand this.
Well, I can't make it make sense. I can't make it rational. There's no logical justification for it, but it's so wonderful that so many people and organizations and even members of Congress and candidates for Congress are now saying it. I mean, I used to just pull my hair out and scream. I mean, for years and years, when they say, how you going to pay for it? Stop talking about how you're going to raise taxes, but it'll be a little bit more on the wealthy and the middle class will only have to pay this and such, and this whole complicated spiel. Tell them you're going to take it out of the military. That's the answer. And increasingly, candidates get this and understand that it wins elections and say it. Take a tiny little bit out of the military. That's how you're going to pay for it. So there is, another organization I'd point out is rootsaction.org, which I work for, that if you go there, you can click a button and email your representative and your 2 senators with one little action to tell them, support this resolution from Congresswoman Barbara Lee to move $350 billion out of the military and into good things. And that Congresswoman and a couple dozen others are promoting, including Ro Khanna, are promoting an amendment now to the National Defense Authorization Act that Senator Sanders is leading in the Senate, the very same amendment. Take 10%, just 10% out of just the Pentagon, so $74 billion, and put it into good things. I mean, this is the least that people can do. I mean, this is just absolute minimal, and you're absolutely right. The U.S. military budget has mushroomed in recent years. We're just talking about going back to the Bush-Cheney era, which I understand President Obama tells us that George W. Bush was a great law-abiding president, but I actually think he was one of the worst war criminals we've ever seen and had a much too big military budget. And that's what we're talking about going back to, just that.
And the more we give this monster, the more it wants. And I mean, that is just the bottom line as to what is happening. That is why we need We the People. Yes, shout out to Congresswoman Barbara Lee, shout out to Congressman Ro Khanna, and they got some others, far too few. Shout out to Senator Sanders holding it down in the Senate, but we need more. So we the people, where does our money go? Because it's our money. And how do we hold these elected officials accountable and threaten their seats? It's our seat. It's really our power, David. People need to know this. Let's get to Jerry. Jerry asked, and this is it, because it's in our psyche. I need you to talk a little bit about why have we been programmed to believe that the more money we spend, the safer we are at the expense of everything else. But this is what Jerry asked. Jerry asked, when someone argues back that we need a strong military to protect against invasion, terrorism, what is the best response, Dave? Please help us.
Well, the long response is at worldbeyondwar.org. The short response is that 95% of terrorist attacks, suicide terrorist attacks, have been motivated in the world over the decades by the desire to get an occupying military force out of somebody's country. And exactly 0 suicide terrorist attacks ever have been motivated by resentment for helping countries with food or water or actual aid that isn't weaponry. So the terrorism is driven by resentment and bitterness and poverty and inequality and brutal foreign occupation. It's not driven by skin color or religion or language. So the easiest way to reduce terrorism is to stop creating it. If you look at the study that Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan did of actions over the past century, campaigns that were principally nonviolent and campaigns that were principally violent, opposing oppression and opposing foreign occupation, the nonviolent campaigns very often lose, but they succeed over twice as frequently as the violent ones. And those successes are many, many times longer lasting. So this notion that you have to resort to violence is absolutely false. You have to resort to nonviolence. You resort to the strongest tool you can use. That's where we're at. But if you were a true believer in military defense and you wanted to scale back the US military to things that were actually defensive, well, you could get rid of 3/4 of the US military today. I mean, look at these 1,000 bases in other people's countries that create resentment and prop up dictators and fuel wars and hostility. If you look at the new climate crisis plan from the Democratic Party in Congress, it says the military is the top consumer of petroleum. The military is the top destroyer of the environment. Here's what we've got to do. We've got to build renewable energy manufacturing on every military base. Not one word about getting rid of them. If you look at Barbara Lee's plan to take $350 billion out of militarism, one of the items she lists, actually a big chunk of that $350 billion, is close 60% of the foreign military bases. Right. So if you believe in having missiles on your coast and a coast guard and a defensive military, how do you explain that the United States has to pay many, many times what any other nation pays for its military? Why does the United States have to go and defend itself around the world while everybody else just gets to defend themselves in their country? And why do the polls show that the world resents it bitterly, doesn't appreciate it, isn't grateful for this so-called service?
Because we are an occupying force. I mean, that really is what we are. And we are less safe because of this mentality. And we need the American people to realize that so that we exert our power. You know, David, a few weeks ago, I got a chance to talk to Jody Evans, as you know, one of the co-founders and directors of Cold Pink. And one of the things she said that really stuck with me, she said, peace takes effort. Peace is relational. So we have to rethink our thinking. And as you mentioned earlier, in the same way that we need to rethink policing in this country, those two things go hand in hand. We have to rethink the military industrial complex and what I would say, deconstruct our construction, because we are socialized to believe the more weapons, the bigger the guns, the big everything, and the more weapons, that makes us safer. Can you comment on that a bit, please?
You know, if Canada wanted to generate anti-Canadian resentment and hostility and terrorist organizations around the world on the US scale, and it in some ways seems intent on taking on that task, it would have to bomb a great many countries, occupy a great many countries, kick in uncounted doors, and to generate that hatred. The notion that you're making yourself safer by going around the world and bombing people and kicking in their doors is just absolute nonsense. If you go to worldbeyondwar.org/less-safe, I've got a list of quotes from just retired, it's always just retired, top US military officials explaining why what they had been doing is counterproductive, is generating enemies. It's not creating them. And people are starting to get it. How did Jamal Bowman beat Elliot Engel? How did Mondaire Jones win his election? Because they started talking about peace abroad and peace at home and peace in our budgets. And they dropped this decades-long nonsense about let's have a smaller government or let's have a bigger government. No, it's what kind of government? Do you want your city or your state or your country investing in force and weaponry and violence, or in services and assistance? I mean, this is the choice.
It's just insanity, but we can undo this. See, these things, these policies and practices were created on purpose, and we can undo them on purpose. And that is what we need. And just God bless Congresswoman Barbara Lee for having the courage to be totally consistent on this. She has been. And I'm glad that other folks' eyes are opening to this, because people should be rewarded for evolving, especially if they're evolving in the right direction. And so this is a beautiful thing, but we have to keep up the pressure. And that is why it is so important that so for everybody that's watching us live, I want them to go and tell some friends. They need to go to these websites, go see these organizations, educate yourself and spread the word. See, this is good news, baby. You can't keep it to yourself. So that we build a force of citizen leaders that are just not going to take it anymore. Just go on and add the military industrial complex to your list of goodness. All right, David, we have a comment from Summer. Summer says, my junior high aged students understand this. Also, it is devastating for them to know this. They get it, and it is heartbreaking. So basically, our teacher She's saying the kids get it, the babies get it, but these damn adults don't get it.
Well, more and more the adults are starting to get it and starting to apply pressure and getting elected officials. The whole squad in Congress gets it. Congressman Khanna gets it. Dozens of Congress members get it. And the more they hear from us, the more they'll get it. But when I go and talk to classrooms full of students and I say, we've got to end all war, the good wars, the bad wars, the racist wars, the humanitarian wars. We've got to get rid of the whole military machinery. As a matter of survival, we've got to focus on real dangers, not generating additional ones. Some people get it, but most people scream Hitler. What about Hitler? What about Hitler? What about Hitler? I mean, it's remarkable, much more so in this country and to a lesser degree in Europe than in other parts of the world. It's just, it's in their blood. I mean, we're just saturated with it from birth.
Yeah, it's in our DNA. It's who we are as a country, David. And that's what I want you to, because I want to go back, and I'm sorry for cutting you. I got to go back to Jerry's question, because this is real. And I want you to put on your professorial hat, your teacher's hat on this. He says, when someone argues back that we need a strong military to protect against invasion, terrorism, what really is the best response to that, to push back on that?
Well, first of all, we do not. Go to Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting website and see their analysis of the story last week that North Korea is threatening to nuke the United States. It is not. It also is not planning to take away your freedoms. There are not enough human beings in North Korea to occupy one state in the United States, should it want to, and it doesn't. There isn't any nation threatening the United States. Iran spends less than 1% on its military compared to what the United States does. When a couple of days ago, when Israel bombed Iran's nuclear facilities and nobody said a word, if Iran had bombed Israeli nuclear facilities, which actually have actual nuclear weapons, we would have been told the Iranians were coming to eat us for breakfast, but they aren't. They just aren't. There isn't any threat out there. Russia spends some 5% what the US does on its military and less each year and wants to be partners and friends, but the US media and politicians will not stand for it and tell us lies about Russia nonstop. And China spends, a good fraction of what the US spends on its military, but is eager to spend less if the US would spend less. There is every ability to start a reverse arms race. It would just take a slight step, and we may get it. If we get a 10% moving of the money to decent things in the US Congress in the coming month, I predict you're going to see reductions in military spending by other countries. And these are other countries that are, most of them, being badgered hard by the US State Department to buy more weapons from US companies. This is what the US State Department does.
And then can you talk about the military industrial complex from the lens of these corporations who benefit generationally to keep us amped up about the need for new toys? And I shouldn't call it toys because I don't want to play games with this. The need for new weapons for destruction. And a lot of these weapons never work, I'm told by experts. We throwing good money after bad. So there's a couple of things here. One, it makes us less safe. Secondly, we're not even getting a good return on our investment. But how callous and greedy do you have to be to continue to try to convince elected officials on the federal level, because we're talking about the federal government right now, that we must continue to invest America's dollars in this nonsense? And it's not helping our veterans, David. I want you to go there with that, because a lot of people hear the Pentagon and they're saying, you guys trying to take money away from the veterans. No, sir. No, ma'am. No, we're not, because that money is not going to them. And many of them, David, live in poverty. They need assistance from the government. Many of our enlisted people right now need food stamps. They need special assistance because they are not even making a living wage. Talk to us about that, Dave.
Well, I'm on the advisory board of a wonderful group called Veterans for Peace, which wants to abolish war and militarism. And this agency, the Department of so-called Defense, is the one department that has never passed an audit. No one has any idea where much of the money is going. It's completely unaccountable. It's a high concentration of wealth at the top when you put money through the Pentagon. And the Congress members are controlled not just by the bribes that we today call contributions to their campaigns from these weapons dealers, but also from the factories that are put in their districts. This is why they'll manufacture one weapon in 85 different congressional districts in little bits and pieces, not because it's efficient, but because it's politically effective. And the Congress members will go out there and tell you, we need these foreign bases and these wars to threatening these other countries and destabilizing the world for jobs. It's a jobs program. And economists will tell you, and there's no dispute about it, that you get more jobs and better paying jobs and better impact on the economy through almost anything else, through education, through green energy, through transportation, even through not taxing working people in the first place. So military taxing and spending is actually a reduction in jobs. It is hard for people to grasp because everybody's neighbors and friends work for some subcontractor of the military. But those are imaginary jobs in the sense that you would have more jobs and better jobs and plenty of money to help everybody in the transition to the new jobs if you shifted our priorities.
Amen to that. And we need infrastructure. Last time I checked, our roads and bridges, particularly countless numbers of us, Americans all across this country, we drive across these bridges, some of us with faith, others are just driving across the bridges, and they are not safe because we have not made the requisite investment in our infrastructure. So whether it's airports, roads, bridges, schools, public spaces, David, we could take that same money. So the same people that are, have those jobs there, because we get it, we don't want to displace anybody. But this is untenable. We cannot support it this way. So why not turn it around and use that money instead of in a destructive way? Let's use it in a constructive way. And God knows there's lots of work to be done in this country. Can we just do that?
I certainly hope we can. Obviously, we could. There's not a law of physics preventing it. There's a law of corruption preventing it. And if you talk about 10% out of the Pentagon, you could get most of that just by ending the war on Afghanistan that candidate Donald Trump promised to end and hasn't ended yet. And just as they were about to have peace talks, you had this nonsense in the New York Times about a Russian agency paying bounties on U.S. heads in Afghanistan with no evidence offered or requested. You could get a big chunk of it out of just getting rid of this extra slush fund that they have, the so-called Overseas Contingency Operations Fund, because I guess President Obama had a focus group that discovered that sounded better than wars. But just getting rid of that slush fund, or closing a little bit of the overseas bases. I mean, whatever people imagine is protecting them from North Korea bombing their house, it doesn't need to be touched. I can't imagine what it is, but it doesn't need to be touched to take 10% out of the U.S. military.
And we are the only nation, correct me if I'm wrong, that put a nuclear weapon that bombed some folks, right? Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Last time I checked, I don't know. Is there another nation that has been as destructive as we have in that particular way? So our fear, we're the only nation that has done that, David, as far as I know.
Yeah, it's projection. It's what the U.S. wants to do. It projects on the rest of the world. They're going to do it to us, so we better do it to them first. And that those lies that have been told for 75 years coming up in a couple of weeks about those bombs, when President Truman went on the radio and said he bombed a military base when he bombed a city, and said it was revenge against the Japanese, but they very quickly started claiming it was defensive and it saved lives and they were about to invade with millions of troops, which was, just a pile of lies. Japan was ready to surrender. Japan wanted to surrender. Russia was about to invade. The US knew that Japan was going to surrender. The US, after the bombings, the US government put together a formal commission of big shots and did a study that concluded that Japan would have surrendered with no bombs, no US invasion, and no Russian invasion. So everyone sort of forgets that they could have bombed an empty field, but bombed a city. And everyone intentionally avoids the fact that they bombed another city a few days later. And they moved it up a couple days because they were afraid Japan might surrender too quickly before they could bomb that second city and test that other kind of bomb. And people, my kids are lied to about this in their elementary schools today in this country because it justifies the militarism going forward. Most of the world is trying to abolish nuclear weapons, not just abolish first strike policy, which the US has and should abolish, but abolish nuclear weapons. And the United States is the number one force at the UN opposing that move. This will kill us all. We have been incredibly lucky. We have had incredible good luck avoiding close calls driven by accidents and incompetence and hostility. And now under Obama and under Trump, you have this development of what they call more usable, smaller nuclear weapons, which is a threat to all of us. And we understand that now far better than 75 years ago, not just because they have nuclear bombs that are thousands of times bigger, but also because they understand that a so-called small nuclear war in one part of the world can create a nuclear winter, can destroy crops worldwide.
I mean, if there were ever a true, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is so quotable. And last Thursday, I had a chance to have Major Danny Swanson on, and I mean, it was like, ooh, whoa. And he wrote an article about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how we only tell one side. It benefits this country and the narrative that we had to only talk about the I Have a Dream and not necessarily to talk about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said I was against the war, that, the evils of militarism, materialism, and racism is going to do us in. And part of that, I mean, what leads me to bring that up is what you just said about these nuclear weapons. We have more knowledge, more technology, can destroy quicker and with more precision than we could 75 years ago. So when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, what affects one directly affects us all indirectly, to me, that is the moral of this story. Yeah. That we have to care about this because there's no escaping this and nobody's coming out of this alive. I mean, if we were to even, I shudder to think about a World War III, but if you even think that thought, the world is over. We are all dead. And it doesn't get any more realer than that as a motivation to denuclearize.
We got guided missiles and misguided men, Dr. King said, and we should not adjust to it. We should be maladjusted to this society, and we have to end it all together. We have to end racism, extreme materialism, and militarism together because we're stronger as a movement. There are more of us in it when we do that, and because they're interlocking evils. And the new people's movement that puts climate destruction in there as a fourth evil, I think is exactly right. Though you can keep adding more of them on there, but we've got to listen to that wisdom that Dr. King had and that SNCC and others in the civil rights movement had before him, and said you got to resist war, you got to resist the draft, you got to move to human and environmental needs, and not continue down this course that leads, as Dr. King said, to spiritual death.
That's the moment we in. That sums it up. We are at a spiritual death. So in our moments remaining, I want to, so you painted the picture. We've been painting the picture about what the current reality is or realities are in this realm. Can we talk about action steps that people can take? Because sometimes when you're told this kind of truth, it's so overwhelming and it's so heavy. And we got COVID and we got civil unrest. We got the Black community saying, hey, America, we've been telling you this since day zero, and it's taking you too long to wake up. This is another heavy burden that we must deal with. We must have the courage to deal with this. What are some proactive things that Ms. Johnson down the street can do, or the millennial around the corner can do? Any generation, from people with they're citizen leaders. They just in their neighborhood, they want to do good. They found out about this issue. They're piqued, and they want to know how can they be the change they want to see in the world. To quote Mahatma Gandhi. What can they do, Dave?
Well, go to worldbeyondwar.org, join your local chapter, start your local chapter, join our campaigns on divestment, get your local city or county or state or university to get money out of weapons profiteering, get your local city to refuse to use military weapons or military training, to ban the acceptance of militarized weapons and training from the US government or anywhere else. I mean, these sorts of steps at the local level are relatively easy compared to state and national, but they build up and they change the culture and they influence the higher levels of government. Work on demanding accountability from local governments on police and on military. We, our on top of that enormous military budget we were talking about earlier, we got state and local governments piling on too, given free land and tax breaks to weapons companies that they won't give to you or me, right? So go to worldbeyondwar.org, join our webinars, join our online courses, get our materials.
And you have a webinar coming up on July the 9th, correct? Is there a webinar?
So many, I can't even keep track.
Okay, so go to the website. But yeah, we got to educate ourselves to this and then act. So I don't want people to feel so overwhelmed by this that they feel as though there's nothing we can do. There's always something we can do. There is promise in the problem. It is not going to be easy, but there is promise in the problem. And there's an African proverb that says that many hands make for light work. Baby, if we can get many hands on this, the work will not be as daunting. So as David says, go to that website. And then also we named Roots Action, didn't we, David? We said Common Defense, Cold Pink, About Face, Peace Action, Our Revolution, the Poor People's Movement, Public Citizen, Veterans for Peace. There are so many. World Without War. Oh my God, it's so many resources out there that you don't even have to recreate the wheel. We can do this, and we can do this together, and demand more from your Congress people, especially, not exclusively, but especially, and question them about how they vote. How do they feel now in light of new information? Yeah. And if they're not changing, tell them they can't get your vote. That's it. And that's all. It's simple.
Yeah.
Or run for office.
We got examples for them now. Peace is popular. Peace wins elections, and war, profiteering, corruption loses primaries.
Come on. And if we can change the dynamics of that Congress, we can get some things done. And David, rightfully, you have brought it on down, because sometimes looking at the Congress is daunting. You're absolutely right. We need to look at what our local governments are doing, look at what regional governments are doing. For example, county level government, state, every level of government has a role to play in this. And it is your money. It is your government. It is your power. This is our nation and our world. And we can do something about it. David, any parting thoughts?
Just wanted to mention, when they have this convention in Milwaukee, we're going to put a big billboard up across the street that says 3% of U.S. military spending could end starvation on Earth, and see if anybody notices.
Oh my God. Say that, 3%.
3% of U.S. military spending could end starvation on Earth.
On Earth, not just the United States, on Earth. Y'all wrap y'all minds around what Brother David just said. Brother, I'm gonna try to make it there. If I can't make it there, I'm gonna come virtually. I still haven't made up my mind whether or not I'm going to the convention. But
Yeah. We're going to do that event with you included, one way or the
yes,
other.
I'm coming. I'm coming one way or the other, physically or virtually. But just thank you so much for everything that you do. I want to thank all of our 21st century freedom fighters. We all have a role to play. These issues are huge. But a conscious-minded, committed people on the move, we cannot be deterred or stopped. We're going to do this, among other things on that long list. David, thank you so much for joining us. Drop the Mic 2020, baby. Please tell a friend. Visit us on Twitter, Drop the Mic 2020. Visit us on Instagram. Tell some friends about World Without Wars. We can absolutely do this. Be the change we want to see in the world.